Imagine you are walking down a busy street. Cars are passing. People are talking. Everyone seems focused on their own life. Suddenly, someone falls, right in front of everyone. Maybe they collapse. Maybe they are injured. Maybe they are being attacked. You see it. Other people see it too. But something strange happens. Nobody moves. Everyone looks around. Some people slow down. Some stare for a moment. A few pretend they didn't notice. And then, people keep walking. No one steps forward. No one helps. How is that possible? How can dozens of people witness someone in danger and still do nothing? Most people like to believe they are good, brave, helpful. They imagine themselves rushing forward, saving the day, doing the right thing. But reality tells a different story. In reality, when a crowd forms, help often disappears. This is one of the darkest truths about human psychology. It's called the Bystander Effect, and once you understand it, you will start seeing it everywhere, not just on the streets, but in friendships, relationships, workplaces, and even inside your own mind. Because the scariest part is not that people are cruel. The scariest part is that people do nothing. There is a famous psychological case that shocked the world. In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment in New York. The attack lasted for over half an hour. She screamed for help. Lights turned on in nearby buildings. Windows opened. People saw what was happening. But almost no one intervened. Almost no one called the police. Dozens of witnesses. And yet she was left alone. This case forced psychologists to ask a disturbing question. Why didn't anyone help? Were those people evil, heartless, or something else? The answer turned out to be much more unsettling, because the same psychological force that stopped them lies inside all of us. The human brain behaves very differently in groups. When we are alone, responsibility is clear. If you see someone in danger and no one else is around, your brain tells you something simple. You are the only one here. You must act. But the moment other people appear, something shifts. Responsibility begins to spread. It becomes diluted. Your brain whispers a subtle lie. Someone else will handle it. And suddenly, the urgency disappears. This is called the diffusion of responsibility. And it is one of the most powerful psychological traps in human behavior. The more people there are, the less responsible each person feels. Think about that for a moment. One person might help, but 10 people? They might all stand still. Everyone assumes someone else will step forward. And because everyone is thinking the same thing, no one does. But that's only part of the story. Another psychological force also begins to operate in crowds. It's called social proof. Humans constantly look at others to decide how they should behave. If everyone around you looks calm, your brain assumes the situation is not serious. If everyone around you ignores the danger, your brain copies that behavior. This is why people sometimes freeze during emergencies. They scan the crowd. They look for signals. But if everyone else is frozen too, the silence becomes contagious. No one wants to be the first person to react. No one wants to look foolish, so people wait. And waiting becomes deadly. But here's where things become darker. The bystander effect doesn't only appear in emergencies. It appears in everyday life. Imagine someone being humiliated at work. Maybe a boss insults them in front of everyone. People in the room know it's wrong. They feel uncomfortable, but no one speaks up. Why? Because everyone is waiting for someone else to challenge it. But that person never appears. Or imagine a toxic relationship. Friends notice the manipulation. They see the emotional abuse. But they stay silent. They tell themselves it's not their place. They assume someone closer will step in, and the victim remains alone. This is how silence protects harmful behavior. Not through cruelty, but through hesitation. Manipulative people understand this better than most. Some people instinctively exploit the bystander effect. They know that when something happens in front of a group, the group becomes passive. Think about a manipulative person who humiliates someone in public. Why do they do it in front of others? Because they know most people won't interfere. The presence of witnesses actually protects the manipulator. The crowd becomes a shield. Everyone sees it, but nobody moves. This psychological paralysis gives power to those who are bold enough to abuse it. And once you see this pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. But there is another hidden layer. Fear of judgment. Helping someone means breaking social harmony. It means standing out. It means taking a risk. Your brain starts asking uncomfortable questions. What if I misunderstood the situation? What if I overreact? What if people think I'm crazy? What if I make things worse? These thoughts create hesitation, and hesitation kills action. This is why many people would rather stay silent than risk embarrassment. Because social rejection feels dangerous to the brain, even when someone else is in real danger. Our survival instincts were shaped thousands of years ago. Back then, being rejected by the group could mean death. So the brain still prioritizes belonging over bravery, which leads to a disturbing conclusion. Sometimes people don't help, not because they don't care, but because their brain is trying to protect them from standing out. And when everyone follows that instinct at the same time, human compassion disappears. But here's something even more unsettling. Sometimes people feel relief when someone else takes control. When one person steps forward in an emergency, everything changes. Suddenly others start helping too. The spell breaks. People move. Voices appear. Phones come out. Help begins. Why? Because leadership removes the psychological fog. Once someone acts, responsibility becomes visible again. The crowd now has a direction, but until that first person moves, everyone stays trapped in mental paralysis. Now think about your own life. Have you ever witnessed something wrong and stayed silent? Maybe someone was being bullied. Maybe a friend was clearly being manipulated. Maybe someone needed support, and yet you did nothing. Not because you didn't care, but because you waited. You assumed someone else would step in. Or maybe you looked around and nobody else reacted. So you convinced yourself it wasn't your place. This is the uncomfortable truth about human nature. Most people believe they are heroes in theory, but psychology reveals something different. Courage is extremely rare, and silence is extremely common. But understanding the bystander effect changes something important. It gives you awareness, because once you know the trap exists, you can break it. The moment you recognize that your brain is waiting for others to act, you can override that instinct. You can ask yourself a simple question. If nobody helps, what happens next? This question forces responsibility back into your hands. Psychologists discovered something fascinating about people who resist the bystander effect. They don't see themselves as part of the crowd. They see themselves as individuals. Instead of thinking someone should help, they think I should help. It's a small shift, but it changes everything. And there is another powerful trick. If you are ever in danger yourself, never ask a crowd for help, because crowds rarely respond. Instead, point to one specific person. Look directly at them and say something clear. You in the blue shirt. Call the police. This removes diffusion of responsibility. Now the task belongs to one person, and people are far more likely to act. This simple psychological shift has saved lives. But the deeper lesson is even more important. The bystander effect is not just about emergencies. It reveals something uncomfortable about society. Many harmful behaviors continue because people stay silent, not because everyone agrees, but because everyone waits, and waiting becomes permission. Think about manipulation. Think about emotional abuse. Think about toxic leadership. These patterns often survive because witnesses choose safety over confrontation. But every system of harm depends on silence. Remove the silence, and the system collapses. Which brings us back to the question that started this entire journey. If you were standing in that crowd, what would you do? Would you look around and wait? Would you follow the behavior of strangers? Or would you become the person who breaks the pattern? Because every crowd has one moment of truth. A moment when someone decides whether they will remain invisible or step forward. And the strange thing about human psychology is this. The moment one person acts, others suddenly find their courage too, which means something powerful. Sometimes the difference between silence and action is just one person, one voice, one decision. So the next time you witness something wrong, pay attention to that quiet voice inside your head, the one that says, someone else will deal with it, because that voice is not wisdom. It is psychology, and the moment you recognize it, you gain the power to ignore it. The real question is not whether the bystander effect exists. It does. The real question is much more personal. When the moment comes, will you be part of the crowd or the person who makes the crowd move?